12 alerts pulsed on Marcus's phone. 12. Each was a critical warning from the health sensor monitoring his pregnant wife, signaling a catastrophic turn for their unborn daughter. He saw the data streams. He read the automated texts, pleading for a response. Then, with a casual swipe, he activated Do Not Disturb, silencing her crisis, wrapped his arm around the woman in his bed, and drifted back to sleep. The final name that formed in her mind before darkness took over was Marcus. But Marcus was occupied. What followed, however, was a story of pure resilience. The wife he'd left for dead was no pampered heiress. She was a retired campaign strategist, the architect of a dozen political victories, and her father held a senior seat in the United States Senate. So when she finally grasped the true depth of his deception, she didn't crumble. She started mapping out a strategy. This is the chronicle of how a mother's protective instinct, forged in the fires of a gut-wrenching betrayal, brought a corrupt real estate empire to its knees from the inside. You will want to hear every last detail. So, listen closely. This story reveals a fundamental truth. A lie may fracture your reality, but it does not have the power to write your ending. Olivia lost her daughter, her husband, and very nearly her own existence. But she absolutely refused to wear the label of a victim. She transformed her sorrow into a meticulous plan, her pain into power, and her crushing loss into a charitable foundation that would go on to help countless other women escape similar fates. The takeaway is as straightforward as it is profound. Your situation never gets the final word on your character. It's often when you've been stripped of everything that you finally find out what you're truly made of. Real justice is not about revenge. It is about making certain that those who cause such devastation are never in a position to hurt anyone else again. Months before she made her final play, a damp chill rolled off the San Francisco Bay, winding through the cypress trees of the Golden Gate National Cemetery. The cold seeped through the expensive cashmere coats of the attendees, a kind of cold that felt personal. Standing just apart from the small gathering was Olivia Sterling. Her expression was a flawless, controlled mask of grief, her back as straight as the military headstones that surrounded her. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. To any onlooker, she was the picture of quiet dignity in mourning. But beneath that composed exterior, an emotion far more potent and calculating than sadness was burning. The officiant's words were a low, meaningless hum. He spoke of hollow comforts, like divine plans and heavenly peace. Olivia had abandoned such notions 4 months prior, on the night she lost her baby. It was the very same night her husband ignored her desperate calls for help so he could stay with his lover. And now, standing at the memorial she herself had arranged, Olivia felt the ghost of a smile grace her lips. It was not a smile of joy, but one of icy, tactical success, a plan executed without a single flaw. She remembered the words she'd chanted to herself in the lonely silence of her huge, empty house. They claim grief makes you irrational, but sorrow wasn't what drove me. Betrayal was. And the people responsible for erasing my daughter's future discovered a hard truth. My father taught me how Washington works, and I am not capable of losing. As the ceremony drew to a close, her gaze swept across the grounds, not searching for faces, because she knew, with absolute certainty, where the only two people who mattered were. They were in separate facilities hundreds of miles apart, swapping their designer wardrobes for state-issued scrubs. Marcus Thorne had been given a 25-year sentence. Chloe Vance had received 30. But to understand how Olivia transformed from a devastated, expectant mother into an agent of precise retribution we need to return to the beginning. We have to go back to a day that started just like any other, inside a life that seemed flawless from the outside, but was cracking under the surface. 4 months earlier, a thick fog blanketed Pacific Heights. Olivia navigated her sprawling minimalist kitchen, a weariness deep in her soul that she actively ignored, her entire focus on the child growing inside her. She sat at the quartz waterfall island, a medical-grade monitor wrapped around her belly, its gentle, steady pulse a quiet reassurance. It was a consistent rhythm, a fragile, beloved life developing within. She set a bowl of fresh figs and Greek yogurt before her, trying to summon a smile to hide the dread that was tightening its grip on her. "Time for breakfast, little girl," she murmured to her stomach. At that moment, the sharp, assertive sound of Italian loafers descended the floating glass staircase. Marcus Thorne entered the kitchen with the supreme confidence of a man who believed he was building the new city skyline. His blazer was understated, a bespoke cashmere blend, but the timepiece on his wrist was worth more than their entire nursery. He was also wearing a scent she had never smelled on him before. He didn't acknowledge her belly. He barely even looked at her. His focus was entirely captured by his phone. She watched him, seeing the subtle, subconscious way his shoulders were angled away from her, the ghost of a smirk on his face as he typed furiously. "The high-risk specialist is at 3 p.m., Olivia stated, her voice even. "Will you make it?" Marcus answered without glancing up. "I'm finalizing the financing for the Embarcadero Tower today. I can't just walk away from that for some routine scan." "It's not a routine scan, Marcus. The doctor is worried about some new developments. I really think you should be there." That finally got him to lift his head, his face a mask of annoyance and detachment. "Someone has to fund all this, Olivia," he said sharply. "Or did you forget you haven't brought in a dime in nearly 4 years?" The barb struck its intended target, a familiar, cruel jab, but she wouldn't allow him the pleasure of seeing her wince. She had put a brilliant, high-profile career in political strategy on hold to build a life with him. She'd declined a cabinet-level offer and a lucrative consulting contract, and he now used that choice as a weapon against her. Marcus picked up his briefcase. He made no move to kiss her, or to touch her stomach. He didn't so much as look back at the woman carrying his child. "Marcus," Olivia said, just as he reached for the front door. He exhaled a theatrical, put-upon sigh. "What is it now?" "Please, just make an effort to be there. He said we might get some positive news." For a split second, a trace of something human flickered in his eyes, but it was gone as fast as it appeared. "I'll see," he said, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "My schedule is packed." And with that, he was out the door. The heavy, automated lock clicked into place, leaving behind a vast, crushing silence. She pushed the uneaten figs aside, her appetite having vanished. She cupped her belly with one hand, a silent scream forming in her thoughts. Why are we not important to him? The question felt like a splinter of glass in her heart. She wrapped her arms around herself. "He loves us. Of course he does," she whispered to her baby, the lie tasting like poison. "He's just dealing with a lot of stress from the new project. He adores you." The words were hollow, but how could she bring herself to admit, especially to her unborn daughter, that her own father viewed them as an inconvenience, a footnote in the grand narrative of his life? She felt a soft flutter from within, a trusting, innocent stir. "I love you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion she refused to release. "I love you more than I can say, more than anything else that exists." She had absolutely no way of knowing that she had less than 10 hours before that existence would be completely shattered. Later, in the sterile, impersonal waiting room of the specialist, she sat by herself. The chairs were uncomfortable, the art on the walls generic and forgettable. She had been there for over an hour, and the seat beside her was still glaringly empty. A nurse gave her a sympathetic glance as she walked by. The nurse had seen Olivia at every visit, and she was invariably alone. "Real estate titan changing the world?" the nurse quipped, her voice a blend of compassion and judgment. Olivia produced a faint smile. "Something of that nature. He's very ambitious." The nurse's knowing look said everything. Her face told a story she had witnessed countless times. Just then, Olivia's phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcus. "Dinner with the investors. Won't be home late." She just stared at the words. Another dinner with investors. She couldn't count the endless nights, the times he had come home in the early morning hours, smelling of a strange perfume, always armed with a plausible alibi. For months, the strategist's instincts inside her had been sounding alarms, but she had systematically ignored them. An inkling was one thing. Hard evidence was another. And a part of her was deeply afraid of what she might find if she truly went looking for the truth. She put her phone on silent and laid her hands over the gentle slope of her belly. She would deal with Marcus later. Right now, the only thing on her mind was the precious life she was carrying. Dr. Chen, a kind woman with gentle eyes, looked at Olivia with sincere concern. She laid out the facts. Olivia's blood pressure was at a critical level, and the pregnancy was under immense duress. The doctor's orders were clear and absolute. If she felt any intense cramping or a wave of dizziness, she was to dial 911 immediately. She was not to try to get to a hospital herself or to assume the feeling would go away. A cold tide of fear washed through Olivia as she agreed. The doctor then added softly that for the baby's sake, it was essential that she remain as calm and free from anxiety as was physically possible. Clara promised she would do whatever it took. With that, her specialist scheduled an urgent follow-up and stressed the absolute need for constant monitoring. Clara left the clinic and walked into the biting New York wind. Her phone buzzed one final time. It was Arthur again, texting that a last-minute merger was going late, and he wouldn't be home until well after 2 a.m. Clara swiped the notification away, not bothering to reply. Later, she stood in a hot shower, hoping the steam might loosen the knot of terror tightening in her gut. A quiet, insistent dread warned her that her small bubble of peace was about to burst. Every gesture was deliberate and slow as she whispered to her unborn son, steeling herself for another evening by herself. Tucked into bed, she picked up a novel about a trailblazing female financier who outmaneuvered every rival on Wall Street, no matter how powerful. Though her eyes followed the words, her mind was a million miles away. A single question, cold and sharp, cut through the haze of her anxiety. Are we going to get through this? She pressed a hand over her belly, making a silent vow to the new life growing inside her. "We're fighters, you and I," she whispered to the baby resting safely within her. "And fighters always figure it out." Clara closed her eyes, praying that for once, the universe would prove her right. For a long while, she just lay still, focusing on the simple rhythm of her own breath, trying to anchor herself in the present. That night, a sudden, blinding pain behind her eyes sent her fumbling for her phone to call her husband, Arthur. His line went to voicemail again and again. Overcome with panic, she grabbed their shared laptop, needing to pull up their medical insurance information. As the screen came to life, she saw his personal email account was still open. A message from a woman named Serena was at the top of the inbox. The Carlisle. Suite 1500. Can't wait for tonight. There was no time to process the complete demolition of her world while fighting for her son's survival. I will think about that later, she swore to herself. But her life was about to be permanently fractured. At 11:35 p.m., a savage, breathtaking pain exploded in her skull, knocking the air from her lungs. She stumbled into the great room, leaving a sweaty handprint on the glossy wall of their Manhattan penthouse as her body was seized by uncontrollable tremors. A terrifying pressure was building behind her eyes. The blood pressure monitor she used twice a day began to scream, its piercing alarm shattering the quiet of their Upper East Side home. She crumpled to the floor, a sickening sense of helplessness washing over her as her hands shook too violently to call Arthur again. The call rang out, unanswered. She disconnected and redialed. Voicemail. She stabbed at the screen to send a text. Something very wrong. Baby, Mount Sinai, get here. The read receipt showed he saw it at 10:52 p.m. Nothing. With no more time for the terror choking her, she dialed 911. She clutched her belly, rocking back and forth. Just hold on, my love, she whispered. Mommy's here. Help is on the way, ma'am. The baby gave a weak, fluttering kick in response. Her mind screamed the word she couldn't say. Daddy. He's coming, sweet boy. Clara lied, her voice cracking into a sob, but he wasn't coming. Across the city, in a penthouse suite with a panoramic view of Central Park, high finance mogul Arthur Vance was with Serena Croft. She was Clara's opposite, a coolly brilliant corporate lawyer, fiercely ambitious, and entirely free from the imminent reality of a child. Arthur's phone buzzed insistently on the marble countertop. Serena gestured toward the screen. It's Clara again, she remarked, pushing the device in his direction. Seems pretty insistent. Arthur barely looked up from the portfolio he was reviewing. He waved it away, explaining that Clara's pregnancy nerves had been on a hair trigger for months, transforming every minor pain into a full-blown catastrophe. He silenced the phone and turned it face down on the counter. If it were a real emergency, he said with cool confidence, her doctor has my direct line. He explained to Serena that he was in the final stages of a hostile takeover. She shrugged, settling back against him. You're right, she murmured. She's probably just working herself into a panic over nothing. Arthur smiled, pulling her closer, completely oblivious to the desperate fight for life happening just a few miles south. At that exact moment, an unborn child was losing his battle to live. The ambulance ride was a chaotic blur of sirens and flashing lights. Paramedics surrounded Clara, administering a magnesium drip and shouting numbers related to her rocketing blood pressure. Inside the hospital, an emergency team was activated, their voices a symphony of clinical terms as she was rushed toward the operating theater. Clara clung to a medic's sleeve, pleading, "That's my son in there. Please, you have to save him." A nurse with kind eyes took his place, promising they would do absolutely everything in their power. Clara felt detached from her own body, as if she were a spectator watching the frantic scene from afar. She tried calling Arthur one last, hopeless time, her words dissolving into a choked voicemail. At 11:58 p.m., the steady rhythmic pulse of the fetal heart monitor was suddenly replaced by a long, unbroken tone. It was a sound that shattered Clara's world into a million irreparable pieces. A surgeon stepped out, her face etched with profound sorrow. The doctor didn't need to speak. Clara already knew. "Mrs. Vance," she said softly, "I am so sorry." The hallway seemed to tilt around her. We did everything we could, but the preeclampsia was just too severe. Clara's strength vanished, and she slid down the cold, sterile wall. A raw, guttural cry of agony tearing from her throat, echoing through the desolate quiet of the hospital corridor. Her beautiful son, her little Oliver, was gone. Much later, in the silent sanctuary of the hospital's chapel at 3 a.m, she held a tiny blue knitted cap a nurse had given her. She tried to imagine the sweet smell of the baby she would never get to hold. The tears had run dry, leaving behind a hollowed-out emptiness where her heart used to be. Her phone vibrated. It was a file-sharing notification from the cloud account that Arthur used. The subject line was an alert. A new receipt has been uploaded. She opened it. It was an itemized bill for Arthur Vance, showing a check-in at the Carlisle at 9:07 p.m., charges for champagne and late-night room service, and a final checkout time of 7 a.m. the following day. At the top, the hotel confirmation email had the subject line, "Your romantic getaway is confirmed." Clara stared at the screen until the numbers blurred, and a strange, brittle laugh escaped her. It was the sound of a woman who had just had her entire future erased, only to find out it had been stolen first. It was the sound of sorrow hardening into something sharp and unbreakable. Her son had died alone, while his father was with another woman, ignoring the calls that begged him to be there. The laughter stopped. All emotion drained away. A cold, clear, and methodical purpose rushed in to fill the void, and within that chill, a plan began to take shape. She pressed the tiny cap to her cheek one last time. Then, she placed it carefully in her handbag and rose to her feet. She would be home when Arthur finally decided to return. Arthur Vance entered their apartment at 7 a.m., the faint scent of another woman's perfume clinging to his coat, his excuse already perfected on his tongue. He stopped short when he saw Clara sitting in the shadows of the living room, completely still. She was in the armchair facing the door, the small blue knitted cap in her lap. The laptop on the coffee table was on, displaying the hotel receipt from the cloud drive. Arthur immediately launched into his prepared lie. "Clara, my God, I'm so sorry. The main servers for the Asian market crashed. A total disaster. I've been in a secure data center all night. By the time I saw your messages, I assumed you were home and fine." Clara simply looked at him, her quiet gaze pulling all the oxygen from the room. Arthur shifted on his feet, unnerved. He had braced himself for tears and accusations, not this unnerving calm. "Is the baby okay?" he asked, his voice laced with a flicker of genuine concern. "Did you see the doctor?" Clara finally spoke, her tone flat and devoid of any feeling. "Oliver died. At 11:58 last night." Arthur's confident demeanor shattered. "What?" he whispered. "I had severe preeclampsia. I called you 31 times. Your phone's cloud backup shows you were active on it." Arthur grasped for a defense. "Clara, it was on silent. I was in a meeting with the board. I swear I didn't see them until after, and I thought it was just another scare." "You always said I was just being anxious." Clara gestured to the laptop. "The Carlisle, a suite, billed for last night, $6,200 on the corporate card." Arthur's composure crumbled. He weighed his options and decided to lie again. "The firm booked it for the clients from Zurich. The server farm went into lockdown, so we had to meet there." "It's not what it looks like." Clara raised her head, her eyes finally meeting his. "With Serena Croft? Your emails weren't about a server crash." The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur's face cycled through guilt and panic before settling into a mask of aggressive indignation. "You're not thinking straight," he said, his tone becoming patronizing. "You've just suffered a terrible loss, and you're trying to find someone to blame. I understand. We can talk about this later, when you're feeling more rational." Clara stood, her posture suddenly rigid and strong, no longer stooped by the weight of her pregnancy. "His specialist said that my chronic stress was a significant contributing factor," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I was hemorrhaging, Olivia. Our son needed his father, and you were buying diamonds for another woman." Marcus flinched as if struck, facing a chilling resolve in her eyes that was entirely new. "Olivia, you're not thinking clearly. The grief is making you imagine things. Let me call Dr. Evans. We'll get through this nightmare, I promise. Together." "Out," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the skyline behind him. He tried to puff up his chest, to reclaim his power. "This is my penthouse, Olivia. I'm not leaving. You're having a breakdown. You need professional help." She took a step toward him, her face hardening into a mask. "Before I shelved my career to manage your public image, I was a finalist for a Pulitzer in financial journalism. I know how to follow the money. I know about the falsified investor reports. For the Hudson Yards Tower, I know about the zoning official you have on a secret payroll. I also know which board members would be fascinated to learn about the network of shell companies you established right before the public offering. So when I say, get out, it isn't a suggestion. You have 5 minutes before I start calling my old editors at the Wall Street Journal and a few friends at the SEC." For the first time in their marriage, Marcus Thorne looked utterly terrified of his wife. He grabbed his cashmere coat and vanished without another word. Olivia heard the heavy front door slam, and then her strength failed her. She collapsed to her knees, clutching a tiny cashmere baby blanket. She gave herself precisely 1 hour to shatter, to keen and sob into the impossibly soft fabric. When the 60 minutes had passed, she wiped her tear-streaked face, rose on trembling legs, and found her phone. She navigated to a contact she hadn't touched in over 5 years. Someone Marcus had convinced her was a judgmental, controlling force in her life. "He's boxing you in, Liv." Her father's steady voice echoed in her memory. "One day, you'll have to make a choice." She had chosen Marcus, and now she saw the catastrophic price of that decision. With a shaking finger, she pressed the call button. Her father answered before the second ring, his voice a bastion of familiar comfort. "Olivia." "Dad," she choked out, the single word breaking in half. "The baby is gone, and his entire empire is a lie." A beat of pure, dense silence hung on the line before his voice returned, stripped of all warmth and replaced by the sharp, analytical precision she knew from her childhood. "I'm on the next train from New Haven." Retired Manhattan District Attorney Robert Sterling arrived at Grand Central Terminal 12 hours later. When Olivia opened the door to her Upper East Side penthouse, she saw that the years had carved deeper lines of authority into his stern face. But his eyes were unchanged, still piercing, methodical, missing nothing. He took in the absolute ruin, etched on his daughter's face, and without a word, pulled her into a tight embrace. Pressed against the solid wall of his chest, Olivia's carefully constructed composure disintegrated, and she wept with a visceral agony she hadn't allowed herself to feel until that moment. In the sanctuary of his arms, the fortress she had built around her heart came tumbling down. "I shut you out," she cried. "I believed him when he said you just wanted to run my life. I chose him over you, Dad. And now my baby is gone, and my whole world is a fraud." Robert held her firmly. He uses classic isolation tactics to control his environment. Watching him do that to you was one of the hardest things I have ever witnessed. But that part is over now. He gently lifted her chin, his hands cupping her face in a gesture she remembered from scraped knees and childhood fears. "Show me," he said, his voice quiet but unbreakable. "Show me the evidence." She silently led him to her laptop. She opened a file containing a scanned receipt from a Fifth Avenue jeweler, time-stamped from the night before. Then she opened a browser to an Instagram profile. It showed a well-known influencer wearing the exact custom necklace from the receipt, laughing with Marcus. The post was geotagged at an exclusive Soho club, with a timestamp that aligned perfectly with the string of unanswered emergency calls from her doctor. When she closed the laptop, Robert stared at the dark screen, his jaw set like granite. It was a look Olivia knew well, a prosecutor viewing incontrovertible proof of guilt. "What is the desired outcome, Olivia?" he asked. The inferno of her grief had cooled into something hard and sharp. I want to dismantle everything he has built, she said, her voice now dangerously calm. His company, his reputation, his entire future. I want him to know what it feels like to have everything you love turn to ash. Robert gave one decisive nod. Then we will build a case, as I would a prosecution, with meticulous preparation, without emotion, without a single flaw. We will gather the facts and construct an indictment so thorough that he will have no defense. When we are through, Marcus Thorne, as the world knows him, will no longer exist. He spoke with the quiet certainty of a man who had put criminals behind bars for 30 years. For the first time in weeks, Olivia felt a flicker of something other than despair. "Where do we begin?" she asked. Robert was already scrolling through his contacts. "We begin by hiring a weapon. We need someone with leverage," Robert explained. "You mentioned offshore accounts, development deals structured through LLCs. You never understood. We need a specialist who thrives in those shadows." Olivia knew no one, but her father was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Lena Petrova. She was the most brilliant ADA in my homicide bureau. Now she's the forensic accountant the hedge funds call when they suspect a CEO is cooking the books. Olivia looked at him. "Someone you knew from the office? You've met her at fundraisers." A flicker of regret crossed Robert's face. "I should have kept in better touch. The private sector can change a person's principles, but Lena was always incorruptible." "Do you think she'll help us?" Olivia asked. Robert considered Lena's razor intellect and her profound disgust for corporate criminals. "She'll take the meeting. She always had an unwavering belief in accountability." "Then call her," Olivia urged. "I already have, once," Robert said, ending the call. "She's meeting us for breakfast." Her first question was about his network of shell corporations. "I only know what I gleaned from his press releases," Olivia confessed. "He has a series of LLCs registered in the Cayman Islands for his foreign partners." Lena's voice, sharp and clear, came through the speakerphone. "Then the first step is to trace the money. My team can unravel any corporate veil." "Is that possible?" Olivia whispered. Lena's reply was instant and definitive. "Possibility is determined by motive and resources. You have the motive, and I have the resources." The next morning, they met Lena in a Spartan meeting room with a panoramic view of Wall Street. The deep, mutual respect between her and Robert was palpable. But when Lena's sharp eyes met Olivia's, her professional demeanor softened for a split second, revealing a sliver of genuine empathy. "Robert," she acknowledged, with a nod, then turned to Olivia. "I am profoundly sorry for your loss." After that single shared moment of humanity, the professional chill returned. They sat around a steel table, their coffee growing cold. "We require your services, Lena," Robert began, forgoing any small talk. "Not as a favor to an old mentor. We need the absolute best in the business, and that is you." Lena nodded once, slowly. "I can trace the financial footprints, Robert, but my instincts tell me this goes far beyond a cheating husband." Olivia slid her tablet across the table. The screen displayed a folder of press releases and investor packets she had drafted. "Over the past few years, Marcus had me sign off on dozens of founding documents. He told me they were for our family's philanthropic foundation. He was my husband, I believed him. I never looked closely at the details." Lena's eyes scanned the documents, her expression hardening with each paragraph. "This isn't a foundation," Lena stated, her voice clipped. "These are articles of incorporation for a series of nested LLCs in Delaware. Olivia, if that's your signature on these as a managing partner, this is exponentially worse than an affair." "What are you saying?" Olivia asked, her voice a faint whisper. "I'm saying we need to discover what you unknowingly authorized. If these companies were used to launder money from his foreign investors, Your name makes you complicit. The blood drained from Olivia's face. So he wasn't just betraying our marriage. He was setting me up to take the fall for his crimes. That appears to have been his contingency plan, Lena confirmed, her voice softening by a mere fraction. But there is an upside. If we can prove he intentionally deceived you, a textbook case of fraudulent inducement, we can pivot the entire liability back onto him. He goes to prison, you walk away clean. How do we prove that? We build a detailed timeline. Every document he gave you, every email, every conversation you can recall. Robert's gaze was like chips of ice. I can help. I remember every condescending remark he ever made to me. Olivia looked between Lena and her father. He told me the two of you could barely be in the same room. Robert's jaw was tight. A father-in-law's personal dislike of his daughter's husband becomes irrelevant when his grandson dies, because that man was with his mistress instead of answering his pregnant wife's emergency calls. Old grievances become tactical advantages. Lena looked at Robert, her expression unreadable. Years ago, I warned you about the dirty money flooding New York real estate, Robert. I wasn't being pessimistic. I was worried that men like him would one day end up in your orbit. Your warning was prescient, Robert said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't take it more seriously. Don't be sorry, Lena replied. Be prepared for the fight ahead, because I am with you both until this is finished. For the first time since walking out of that sterile hospital room, Olivia felt the formidable power of an alliance. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Lena offered a small, predatory smile. Don't thank me yet. We'll have champagne the day we read his federal indictment. The following weeks became a dizzying expedition into financial archaeology as Lena's team of forensic accountants began their relentless work. The shock gave way to a cold, crystalline fury. For days, Olivia did nothing but trace the path of her own trust, revisiting years of digital paperwork. Every investment form, every property deed Arthur had slid in front of her to sign, usually when she was exhausted from a gallery opening or distracted by nursery plans. He had twisted her absolute faith in him into a liability. Meanwhile, her brother Liam worked his magic, creating a perfect mirror of the phone's encrypted contents. 2 days later, they had a complete blueprint of Arthur's secret financial world. The reality was more toxic than they'd feared, a labyrinth of ghost companies, untraceable crypto transactions, and shadow accounts. Liam laid it all out for her on a secure video call. Tens of millions of dollars had been funneled through shell corporations bearing her digital signature, entities she never knew she was part of. It confirmed their deepest suspicion, a massive insider trading scheme using stolen pharmaceutical trial data to manipulate biotech stocks. The only question was whether Arthur was the architect or just a highly compensated cog in a bigger machine. Marcus, her father, pored over the transaction logs, his litigator's mind finding the signal in the noise. He spotted transfers coming from offshore accounts far too large for Arthur to control on his own. He isn't the king in this game, Marcus stated grimly. He's a bishop. Someone else is directing the play. Unmasking the puppet master could wait. They had more than enough to burn the whole board down. 3 days after finding the phone, Olivia sat with her father in Liam's minimalist Cambridge apartment. Liam had compiled everything onto a secure drive, irrefutable evidence of Arthur's securities fraud and his affair with Isabel. But the most sickening piece of evidence was a transcript from the phone's messaging app. It showed Arthur's conversation with Isabel at the exact moment Olivia had texted him from the hospital about a pregnancy scare. Marcus read the words again as his son-in-law, in stark black and white, typed, "Annoying. I'll call her later," and dismissed the urgent message. He followed it with a dismissive smiley face emoji to the woman he was with and changed the subject. It was a conscious decision, Marcus said, his voice a low growl of controlled rage. He saw she was in distress and chose to ignore it. Liam nodded. This text chain alone will invalidate their prenuptial agreement. Combined with the financial crimes, he's facing serious federal time. Are you prepared to proceed? Olivia stared at the evidence, a digital record of the lie she had been living. She thought of the child growing inside her, and all the time she'd accepted Arthur's excuses about all-night trading sessions with the Hong Kong market. Burn him to the ground, she said, her voice raw. As Marcus began drafting an email to their attorney, his own phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. A familiar, icy dread washed over him as he read, "Retired lawyers should learn to enjoy their golden years." Attached was a photo of Olivia, taken just moments before, through the window of her favorite cafe, a block from her apartment. He passed the phone to Liam. "Is that Arthur?" Olivia whispered, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "No," Marcus answered, his expression hardening. "Arthur is arrogant, but this has the cold precision of professionals. This is from his partners, the people who know we're about to dismantle their entire operation." "Do we pause?" Liam asked, his hand hovering over the keyboard. Marcus considered the threat, his posture straightening with the instinct of a veteran litigator. "No, we send the package to the SEC in the morning," he declared. "We light the fuse and see who tries to flee the explosion." Liam gave a short, determined nod. "It's good to see you haven't gone soft in retirement, Dad," he said. The information was filed via a whistleblower portal on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Marcus's quiet, semi-retired life was over. 2 stone-faced FBI agents were waiting in his home office. "I am Special Agent Davies," the lead agent said, skipping any pleasantries. "We have a few questions for you concerning an investment fund named Aperture Biocapital." A cold knot formed in Marcus's stomach. It was one of the main shell companies from the phone. "Your name appears on the founding documents as a senior legal advisor," Agent Davies continued, his voice heavy with implication. "We have some questions about its capitalization. I have no familiarity with that company. My son-in-law had me sign a stack of documents a few years back, telling me it was for a family trust to minimize estate taxes," he explained. "We hear that one a lot," the second agent chimed in with a tired smile. They questioned him for nearly 4 hours. By the time they left, Marcus felt mentally bruised. They had wire transfer records and offshore account statements, all outlining a massive stock manipulation scheme, with what appeared to be his signature authorizing every key move. After they were gone, the nauseating truth settled in. Arthur hadn't just been unfaithful to Olivia. He hadn't just endangered their unborn child with his callous neglect. He had spent years carefully constructing a legal cage. And Marcus, the brilliant lawyer, had just been lured right into it. His phone vibrated. An untraceable number. The message simply said, "Should have taken the advice." A second text arrived, this one with a link to a notorious Boston finance blog. The headline screamed, "Legal Titan Marcus, Hayes under SEC investigation for exploiting daughter in divorce scheme." The article claimed Marcus was coercing his vulnerable, pregnant daughter to extort a massive settlement from his son-in-law. Then, Liam called, "Dad, we have a 5-alarm emergency." "I'm guessing. The feds just left my office." "It's worse than that," Liam said, his voice strained. "Arthur launched a full-scale PR war, and the story he's pushing is monstrous." "What story?" "He's claiming you've been putting Olivia under immense pressure to leave him. He's telling everyone that your aggressive legal maneuvering caused her so much stress it led to her high-risk pregnancy diagnosis. He's painting himself as the protective husband trying to shield her from her manipulative father. That is a grotesque, malicious lie, Marcus sputtered. I cleared my entire schedule to help Olivia manage her gallery. I went with her to every single doctor's appointment. Arthur was never at a single one. I know, Dad, Liam said. But he's winning the narrative war. His mother has been calling every influential person she knows in Boston, and the story is spreading. He's trying to utterly destroy your credibility before our evidence can see the light of day. How do we counter it? We stick to the facts, Liam insisted. The affair, the SEC violations, the phone logs showing he ignored Olivia's emergency texts for hours. We have to demonstrate a clear pattern of deceit, but that could take the SEC months to verify. In the interim, you could be facing a federal indictment. Marcus felt the mahogany walls of his study begin to shrink. A month ago, his main concerns were his daughter's challenging pregnancy and her rocky marriage. Now, he was consumed with rage over a son-in-law's betrayal and was the subject of a federal investigation. Have you heard from your sister? He asked. Olivia called me an hour ago, Liam replied. She said to tell you to stay strong. She's on a flight to London chasing down something, but she was vague about it. You know Olivia. When Olivia Hayes curated a show, she didn't just hang paintings. She built an argument on the walls. I hope she's right, Marcus muttered to his empty office. I really, really hope so. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare of public humiliation for Olivia. Faces she knew from Boston's art scene would suddenly find the molding intensely interesting the moment she walked into a room. On a popular finance forum, an anonymous source described her as a spoiled art princess, complicit in her father's scheme to bleed her husband dry. Olivia slammed her laptop shut, turning away from the architectural model of a new wing for the gallery, refusing to let the anonymous vultures see her cry. Back in the solitude of her apartment, she sank into an Eames chair, her fingers tracing the curve of a small sculpture she'd bought for the baby's room. She cried until a dull headache throbbed behind her eyes. She just sat there, suffocating in the silence, wondering if this was how her life fell apart, not in a single crash, but in 1,000 quiet cuts. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. 5 minutes away. When he entered, he saw his daughter looking exhausted and beaten. He didn't offer cheap platitudes. He just observed her with that steady, analytical gaze she knew so well. You're making a fundamental error, he said, his voice calm but firm. You're mistaking the gossip for the verdict. Dad, Arthur has the most ruthless PR firm on the East Coast on his payroll. The government thinks I'm his accomplice. I have no fight left in me. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes sharp. That's where you're mistaken. You have the phone, you have your clean conscience, and you have me. I did not spend 4 decades dismantling corrupt corporations to let some slick hedge fund manager destroy my daughter's life. We are not going to engage him in the tabloids or on Twitter, Marcus told her. We are going to take this battle to his investors, and every single person who enabled his fraud will be a material witness when his empire comes crashing down. By the time we're finished, Arthur Vance will be a pariah in this city. Then he will finally understand what it means to be truly worthless. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room on the top floor of a financial tower in downtown Boston, a space of hushed power and 9-figure deals, all glass and steel and the faint smell of money. Marcus Hayes sat at the head of a massive marble table, perfectly still. Across from him sat 3 individuals in impeccably tailored suits, the senior partners of Bayfront Capital, Arthur Vance's most significant backers. Gentlemen, Ms. Albright, Marcus began, with a cool, civil smile. Thank you for making time for me. I know how busy you are. The lead partner, a formidable woman named Evelyn Albright, gave a crisp, dismissive nod. Mr. Hayes, your reputation certainly precedes you. A meeting on such short notice usually means a story is about to break. So what have you got for us? I'm here about the story you can help me prevent from ever being written, Marcus said, sliding a sleek, encrypted tablet across the polished mahogany. I've uncovered a severe breach in your risk management protocols, centered around your top portfolio manager, Ethan Hayes. The three executives on the board exchanged uneasy glances. The youngest of them, a tech prodigy named Ben, leaned forward. What kind of breach? Marcus tapped the tablet, which displayed a forensic analysis of network traffic. Your premier alpha fund, the engine of your firm's growth. It was leveraged to execute a fraudulent short sell, timed perfectly with a data leak designed to tank a target company's stock. Mr. Hayes used his wife's credentials to orchestrate the leak, framing her for insider trading to cover his tracks. A tense, suffocating silence filled the boardroom. I trust, Marcus continued in a steady voice, that this revelation is as disturbing to you as it was to me. The Vanguard Innovations brand has no business being connected to securities, fraud, and market manipulation. Catherine Vance, the CEO, finally found her voice, though it was brittle. Why bring this to us? Why not take it straight to the SEC? Marcus explained that he was offering them the chance to manage the crisis internally. He noted that if this became a federal investigation, the consequences would extend far beyond Ethan Hayes. The headlines would scream about a catastrophic failure of corporate governance. Investor trust tends to vaporize when the narrative shifts to gross incompetence at the executive level. The threat was clear and potent. Ben's face was pale, and the third board member, Mr. Allister, was anxiously checking his heart rate on his watch. What do you want? Catherine asked, her tone sharp and direct. Marcus had only one condition. He wanted Ethan Hayes' contract terminated for cause, effective immediately, with a public statement citing gross professional misconduct. He also demanded the firm issue a formal apology to his daughter, publicly exonerating her. And if we refuse, Mr. Allister challenged, then this entire forensic audit, along with the detailed dossier it summarizes, gets sent to the Wall Street Journal, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and a few key regulators I happen to know personally. Marcus let the weight of his words settle in the room, explaining that the resulting scandal would destroy everyone involved, but the leadership of a prestigious Chicago hedge fund would face the most ruinous reputational damage. Catherine stared him down, then picked up the tablet and began swiping through the irrefutable data trail. Marcus waited, perfectly composed, sipping a glass of still water. He saw their expressions morph from defiance to shock as they processed the undeniable proof of the setup. At last, Catherine put the tablet down and made eye contact with her partners. A silent agreement passed between them in a heartbeat. We'll need our internal security team to verify this, Catherine said, her voice tight with tension. Of course, Marcus replied, rising to his feet and buttoning his jacket. But you are on the clock. He walked to the boardroom door, then paused, his hand on the brass handle. On a personal note, my daughter is 7 months pregnant with Ethan's child. Her trading license is suspended, and she's a person of interest in a federal case because Mr. Hayes was compromised. So, believe me when I say, my asking you to simply fire him is an act of extreme restraint. He let the door close softly behind him. Not even 48 hours later, the head of compliance and 2 corporate lawyers intercepted Ethan Hayes as he stepped out of the elevator onto the main trading floor. Mr. Hayes, the compliance director said, without preamble, we need to speak with you. What's this about? Ethan asked, his irritation obvious. We've flagged some anomalies related to the acquisition models for the Omnicorp deal. The board requires a meeting. Ethan strode behind them toward the executive suite. He felt the low hum of the trading floor die down, noticing the analysts and junior traders watching him pass. Inside the conference room, the three senior partners sat waiting, their faces like stone. "Ethan, have a seat," Catherine said, her tone utterly devoid of warmth. "What in God's name is going on?" he shot back, choosing to remain standing. "We are placing you on immediate and indefinite administrative leave, pending a full investigation into a conspiracy to commit securities fraud and the deliberate compromise of a fellow employee's credentials." Ethan's face flushed, a dark, dangerous shade of red. "This is ridiculous. I can explain every single trade." "I'm sure you think you can," Catherine replied, her voice as cold as ice. "In the meantime, your access to all Vanguard systems and properties is revoked. As of this moment, security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." "You can't be serious," Ethan yelled, the sound bouncing off the soundproof glass of the otherwise silent room. "We are," Mr. Allister confirmed, sliding an official letter across the vast oak table. It was the formal notice of his suspension without salary. It informed him that he could contact his lawyer, but warned that causing a disturbance would be ill-advised. The financial news blogs would have a field day with footage of a star trader being forcibly removed from his own firm. Ethan's eyes darted from the letter to the partners' rigid faces, then to the security officers standing impassively by the door. For the first time, a flicker of genuine panic crossed his features. "This is not over," he stammered. "You are making a colossal mistake." "Perhaps," Catherine allowed, with a chilling lack of emotion. "But it's our company to protect. Good day, Mr. Hayes." Isabel learned that her husband Ethan had been fired not from him, but from a call from her father. "It's done. He's out," Marcus said, his voice firm. Isabel sank onto the arm of her couch, her hand reflexively protecting her pregnant stomach. "How did you do it so fast?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I presented the board with an inescapable reality," he answered. "They simply made the only rational decision to save their firm." "So, what's the next step?" Isabel asked. "Now we watch," he said. Ethan is cornered. He's going to panic. He will reach out to his partner in this for an exit strategy. We'll be listening to see who he calls. As for the SEC case against you, your attorney is already making progress. The forensic team proved that the incriminating trade data was planted on your terminal remotely, which demonstrates that someone else framed you. This proves you weren't the one who initiated the illegal trade. We just need to identify who did." Isabel let out a ragged breath, feeling the first spark of hope she had felt in months. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We're not out of the woods." The next crucial break in the case came from Nina. 3 days later, she called Isabel, her voice buzzing with urgency. "I've got a positive ID on the woman Ethan has been seeing, a Serafina Rossi, and what I've found is mind-blowing." "What is it?" Isabel asked, her heart starting to pound. "She's not just some side piece. She masterminded this whole operation from day one." Nina explained how Serafina had been building a file on Ethan for almost 2 years, long before she ever made contact. She had detailed knowledge of Isabel's family, especially her father's powerful history. "But why?" Isabel asked, completely lost. "Because this is what she does," Nina said grimly. "She's a professional specialist in financial sabotage. She creates entirely new identities for each target. I found traces of her work connected to similar schemes in London and Hong Kong. Her real name is probably buried under a dozen fake passports, but her signature methods are the same." A sickening sense of clarity washed over Isabel. Ethan wasn't the hunter. He was the tool Serafina used to get inside the company. But why target Vanguard? It's a major fund, but there are bigger players. Nina's tone grew heavy. This was never about the fund itself. She chose Ethan because he was the most direct path to you. And she chose you to get to your father, Marcus Thorne. My father's reputation, the classified information he has from his years as a district attorney. She was planning to blackmail him. He has access to sealed indictments and a private network of informants that a woman like Serafina would consider the Holy Grail. A wave of dizziness hit Isabel. She'd been aiming her anger at the wrong person. Ethan was a greedy fool, a pawn. Serafina was the kingmaker. "Does my father know?" she asked. "He's getting the full report right now," Nina confirmed, "and he is furious. There's more. The profits from the illegal short sell, the funds that were laundered through crypto accounts, opened in your name, were all eventually consolidated into a secondary, anonymous network of wallets. Wallets that belong exclusively to Serafina. She was playing her own partner, and my husband, Ethan, was completely clueless. Her endgame was to cash out and disappear, leaving both of us to take the fall and face a long stretch in federal prison. The sheer scope of the deception was sickening. I had already lost my career, my marriage, and my reputation, all because of a woman whose existence I had never even suspected. So, what was our move? My father, Marcus, had a strategy. "We let the wolves circle," he said. "Then we show the alpha that he's being hunted." The plan was as direct as it was ruthless. Anya had been playing my husband, Liam, for months. We just needed to expose her game. His monumental pride would do the rest. It began with a series of encrypted files, little breadcrumbs of poison sent to Liam through a secure channel he thought only he and Anya used. A warning from a supposedly disgruntled engineer who saw something, a manipulated satellite image of their construction site sent from a burner email. A fragment of a deep-faked audio file, expertly crafted, appeared in his private cloud storage. Each piece of the toxic puzzle painted the same humiliating portrait. Anya wasn't his partner in their massive green tech venture. She was his puppeteer, and she was getting ready to cut the strings and feed him to the SEC to protect herself. Liam, being the classic narcissist he was, predictably shattered. He stormed into Anya's penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, his face a terrifying canvas of fury. "You've been undermining me," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "This whole time, the carbon credit reports, you were faking them. You were setting me up to be the sole target of the federal investigation." Anya, to her credit, looked entirely unfazed. She had anticipated this exact confrontation. "Darling, you're becoming emotional. Whatever bizarre narrative you've spun, I can promise you, it's pure fiction." He slammed a tablet down on her granite countertop, its screen casting a cold, artificial light on her face. "Explain this," Liam spat. It was a file from a shadow server she thought was untraceable. It held their encrypted chats, falsified environmental projections, and chillingly precise financial models. A detailed blueprint for corporate sabotage that cast him as the fall guy. "These are the contingency plans you told me were just for our protection," he said, his voice shaking with rage. Anya nonchalantly picked up the tablet, drumming her manicured nails on the screen. Her expression was a perfect mask of indifference, but the almost imperceptible tick in her jaw told another story. You could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as she searched for an escape route. "Where did you get this?" Anya asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Does it really make a difference? You've been setting me up for a year. Every zoning board I battled, every all-nighter I spent on those architectural drafts, was it all just to create a big enough disaster so you could short the company's stock and buy out the patents? Was any of this partnership real, or was I just another asset you were planning to strip? Anya just looked at the laptop, her expression morphing into something that looked disturbingly like pity. "Oh, Liam," she sighed, her tone dripping with mock disappointment. "You've never been able to appreciate the art of the deal, have you? Every move was for us. The strategy was always to use this company as a proof of concept, secure our legacy, and build our own private investment empire, somewhere far away where the rules are more flexible. Our future?" Liam scoffed, the sound bitter and raw. "You were planning to use my pregnant wife's environmental charity as a front to funnel the fraudulent funds. I was creating a necessary firewall to insulate our capital," Anya corrected him, her voice like silk. "There is a profound difference. Your wife's digital signature is on every grant application for that new urban renewal project. She's the first person the investigators will look at. As soon as the questions begin, she becomes the focus of their inquiry, and we simply disappear. And those offshore accounts? That was just our emergency fund," Anya purred, moving closer, her voice dropping to a hypnotic whisper. "But none of that matters now. We can still have everything we planned for." Liam just stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of betrayal and rage. For one heart-stopping moment, he seemed to hesitate, as if the sheer magnetic pull of his ambition for her might eclipse his conscience. But it didn't. "I trusted you," he said, his voice hollow and lifeless. "I was willing to risk my own child's security for you. I blew up my entire life for you, and your plan was to gut my company and let me go to prison. Liam, just listen to me." "No," he said with chilling finality, taking a step back toward the penthouse door. "It's over. I am not taking the fall for you." He turned and walked out. For a second, Anya stood perfectly still, and then her carefully constructed composure shattered, revealing the ice-cold fury that was always roiling just below the surface. Liam went directly to the U.S. Attorney's office. He laid out the entire conspiracy, from the fraudulent materials reports to Anya Laurent's real plan. He expertly painted himself as the idealistic innovator, a visionary architect who was manipulated by a predatory financier. The federal agents listened, took pages of notes, and immediately started making calls. 24 hours later, a team of agents raided Anya's glass-walled office in the Seaport district to take her into custody. She was not there, but they tracked her to a private data center in Cambridge, where she was attempting to remotely wipe the company's servers. They arrested her in the middle of the server farm in front of a dozen technicians. The glow of smartphone cameras was blinding. The story was on every financial news site within minutes. A stunning, powerful private equity CEO in a designer suit being led away in handcuffs. With my lawyer, Evelyn, sitting beside me, I watched the whole thing unfold on a live news stream. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a glimmer of hope. "It's really finished, isn't it?" I asked. "She's been arrested. Liam gave them everything. They'll be investigating her now, not me." Evelyn nodded, but her expression remained cautious. "It's a very solid beginning. The U.S. Attorney is proceeding with the theory that you were another of her unsuspecting victims. The digital paper trail, the falsified donation receipts, it all supports your innocence. So, I'm safe. You're safe." I let out a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding for the past year. My eyes went to the framed ultrasound picture of my son, Oliver, on the end table. "We did it, little guy," I whispered. "It's all over." But it wasn't. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Evelyn, and her voice was tight with panic. "They've dropped all the charges against Anya." "What do you mean?" "The server data is gone. The entire encrypted evidence drive Liam gave them has been wiped. It's completely unrecoverable. But that was on a secured federal server. Someone would need the highest level of clearance to erase that, I argued, my voice beginning to shake. How is that even possible? I have no idea, Chloe replied. But the case is dead in the water, and Anya Laurent is a free woman. And Chloe, there's something else. How could there possibly be anything else? She knows it was you, Evelyn said, her voice heavy. She knows you were the one who convinced Liam to go to the authorities, and she will not let that go. I sank onto the couch, the fragile hope I'd felt just hours ago turning into a familiar, icy dread. So now she's coming for me. She's coming for all of us, Evelyn corrected. The first strike came that night. I drove to my father's brownstone to plan our next steps, only to see an ambulance parked at the curb, its lights flashing silently in the twilight. Paramedics were carrying him out on a stretcher. His face was a terrifying shade of blue. He was gasping for air, a hand clutching his throat. "Dad!" I screamed, running towards him. "What's wrong?" "It's his security system," one of the paramedics explained. "Someone hacked his smart home and turned off the air filtration. He has severe allergies. He's in anaphylactic shock. We need to go. Are you his daughter?" "Yes, I am." I climbed into the back of the ambulance and took my father's clammy hand. "Dad, please, you have to hold on." Marcus's eyes fluttered open. His grip felt faint, but his gaze was like steel. "You finish it," he wheezed, his voice thin and strained. "No matter what she tries, you see this through. Promise me, Chloe." "I promise." His eyes slid shut again. As the paramedics worked frantically around him, I could only sit there, paralyzed by the awful thought of how much more I could stand to lose. Marcus was stabilized after a few agonizing hours, but the doctors said he would be in the intensive care unit for days. I felt completely alone, but things were about to get much worse. My phone vibrated. It was Evelyn, and I steeled myself for another blow. "I have to step down as your lawyer," she said, her voice choked with anguish. "What?" "Evelyn, no, you can't do this." "Anya's people dug something up from my past," she said, her voice starting to break. "A sealed ethics complaint from when I was a junior associate. If I don't walk away, they will leak it to the press and have me disbarred. My firm, my husband, she will tear it all down." "Evelyn, please," I begged. "You promised you would see this through with me." A long, painful silence stretched over the line, broken only by a quiet sob from her end. "I am so very sorry, Chloe. I wish I was strong enough to fight her, but I'm not. I have my own family to protect." "I understand," I said, even though a furious part of me didn't understand at all. "Thank you for everything you've done." "I pray you find a way to stop her," Evelyn whispered, and then the connection ended. I was adrift in the sterile, silent waiting room of the cardiology wing, just another face in a sea of anxious strangers. My husband was upstairs, my lawyer had just dropped me, and the woman responsible for it all was not just free, she was methodically tearing my world apart. I had never felt so utterly and profoundly alone. I stared at a beige wall, the quiet in the room so heavy it felt like a weight on my chest. The only piece of good news was that my husband was still breathing. The bad news was, quite literally, everything else. Genevieve was out, and Marcus was almost certainly cutting a deal to save himself, painting himself as her primary victim. Every legal avenue we'd explored had become a dead end. That's when the text messages started. They arrived from masked, untraceable numbers, each one a perfectly aimed piece of psychological warfare. "Did that journalism degree of yours make you think you could choreograph my downfall? A man with your husband's condition is so sensitive to stress. Every one of your allies is gone. I am going to take your life apart, brick by brick, and you will do nothing but sit there and watch." I swiped each one away without a word. I knew she was baiting me, searching for a crack in my composure, a hint of terror. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction, but late at night, with the low hum of the hospital's ventilators, as my only companion, it was hard not to feel the walls closing in. Chloe felt like she was sinking in a sea of hopelessness. What was the use in fighting anymore? Her son, Daniel, wasn't even born yet, and his future was already caught in a crossfire. Marcus and Genevieve were beyond her reach. She felt like a complete and utter failure. She opened her phone to the latest ultrasound photo, her thumb stroking the tiny, flawless curve of her son's nose. "I've already let you down," she whispered to the screen. A deep, gut-wrenching wave of grief crashed over her, and for the first time, she let herself completely shatter. For what seemed like an eternity, she had been holding back a tidal wave of fear and grief. After some time, a young resident gently tapped her shoulder. "Mrs. Thorne," he said quietly, "your husband is conscious now. He's asking to see you." Lying in the private room, Marcus looked 10 years older, diminished by the web of wires and monitors tracking his heart. But as Chloe walked in, his eyes found hers, and they were as sharp and piercing as ever. "You look wrecked," he said, his voice a dry whisper. Chloe mustered a faint smile. "You should see the other guy," she said. "Fair enough," he rasped, nodding toward a plush armchair near the window. "Sit, tell me what happened." Chloe laid it all out. She told him about the food critics being given their stolen signature recipes, Genevieve's venomous phone call, and how every last bit of her resolve had evaporated into thin air. Marcus listened, his face a mask, not interrupting once. When she was done, he asked a single, pointed question. "So, you're just giving up?" "I don't know what else there is to do," she admitted, her voice hollow. "Yes, you do," he shot back. "You're my wife. You're the most tenacious investigative journalist I know, and you are not going to let that vindictive food critic win." "But she already has, Marcus. She took everything." "She ruined our opening," he corrected. "That is not the same as taking everything." He winced as he tried to shift his weight against the pillows. "Back when I was just a line cook in Paris, my first mentor had a phrase for this. He called it, getting your kitchen burned. Your investors walk, your suppliers suddenly cut you off, your entire menu gets leaked. It feels like the end of the world. But for him, that was always the best time to invent something entirely new." He continued, "Our first plan was too safe, too by the book. It was always going to lose against someone who pays off the people who write the book. So now, we get unconventional." A sharp smile she hadn't seen in years touched his lips. "Genevieve has a history," he said with absolute certainty. "With other chefs, other restaurants, you need to find them. People like her collect enemies like trophies, and a ruined chef never throws away the receipts. Find the careers she's destroyed, and you'll find the proof she thinks she buried." She told him she had no idea where she would even start. "You start with public records," he instructed, "health department archives, liquor license filings, old articles from defunct food blogs. Genevieve has been doing this for 15 years. She's left a trail of financial devastation all over New York. You just need to recognize the pattern." "And what do I do when I find these people?" she asked. "Then you give them something Genevieve never saw coming," Marcus said, a new fire in his eyes. "You give them a chance to get even, a chance for redemption. You build a coalition." "A coalition?" The idea seemed impossible. "Genevieve's entire strategy is to isolate her victims," he explained. "She picks chefs without family money or powerful connections. She knows they're easy to crush one at a time. But if all of you file a class action suit together," he finished, "you might just have enough power to get her blacklisted from the entire industry." The plan was audacious and terrifying, but for the first time in weeks, it felt possible. It was a way forward. I'll try, she promised. He shook his head slightly. No, you'll do it. For our family and for our son. We don't have surrender in our vocabulary. She gave him a slow, firm nod. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and told him to get some rest. She had work to do. For the next 3 days, she immersed herself in a world of digital restaurant archives. She waded through countless business filings and forgotten blog posts. Her journalistic instincts finally sharpened on a new target as she searched for a familiar signature. She looked for chefs and families bankrupted by stolen menus, supplier sabotage, and coordinated media attacks. It began with a picture from an old culinary awards ceremony. Slowly, a disturbing pattern emerged. She found a shuttered bistro in Philadelphia from 2018. The chef, a rising star, was accused of stealing recipes by his own financial backers just before he lost his restaurant. Next, she found a failed seafood concept in Boston from 2016 and a family-run vineyard in Napa from 2014. The playbook was identical every single time. And in the background of grainy photos from old galas, she saw the same woman. The same face, under different corporate mastheads, Geneviève Dubois, then G. Davois, then Vivienne Dupree. 3 different names, but the same predator. She compiled every piece of information into a new, heavily firewalled folder. While most of the victims had disappeared from the culinary world, one name kept appearing in old, obscure online forums for hospitality workers. A single voice still trying to sound the alarm. David Chen. She tracked him to a small town in upstate New York, where he now ran a private catering business from his home. It took 4 emails before he wrote back, his reply laced with suspicion. My name is Chloe Thorne, she had written. I believe a woman we both know is attempting to ruin my husband's restaurant. After a full day of agonizing quiet, a single word appeared in her inbox. Geneviève. That was her name when she stole my concept and destroyed my career. I know, she typed back, her fingers shaking just a little. She is doing the exact same thing to my family right now, and I need your help. After another long, tense pause, David replied, I saved everything, every doctored invoice, every stolen recipe. I always had a feeling that one day another one of her victims would come looking. Tell me where you are, she wrote back instantly. I'm driving up in the morning. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt a tiny, stubborn flicker of hope. David Chen worked out of a cramped home office that smelled of rich espresso and the faint electric scent of old servers. The windows were sealed with blackout shades, holding the bright afternoon at bay. David himself looked far older than his 52 years, his face etched with a deep, settled weariness. You must be Chloe, he said, his voice quiet and raspy. Please step inside. His office was less of a workspace and more of a vault. Towers of external hard drives and neatly labeled binders covered nearly every flat surface. For years, I've been waiting, David said, his voice a low hum in the bustling diner. Waiting for someone to show up who could actually do something with the evidence I kept. He pointed to a rugged, military-grade laptop. It's all here. Every secret text Geneviève sent to the mole in my kitchen, every recipe concept he fed to her. I tracked their digital footprint for 2 years after she destroyed me. I saved it all, waiting for this moment. He slid a heavy, encrypted hard drive across the Formica tabletop for someone who could actually fight back. On the screen, she saw folders overflowing with damning culinary designs, audio files, and covertly snapped photos. It was a complete chronicle of corporate sabotage going back a decade. She asked why he never brought it to the authorities. I tried, he said, his voice dripping with scorn. They were either on her payroll or her influential partners got the entire case thrown out. Genevieve is insulated by layers of cash and connections. Every time I thought I had a solid case, a key witness would suddenly change their testimony, and I'd be written off as some bitter, unstable chef. So, you just quit? Her eyes locked with his. I survived, he corrected her. There's a big difference. I ran out of money to pay lawyers, but I held on to this, banking on the hope that someone with more to lose, with a bigger stake in the game, would finally come along. She thought about her unborn son and the life she and Marcus were trying to build. I have every reason to see this through, she told him, her voice unwavering. Then you'll need this, he replied, pressing a small, encrypted key into her palm. Use every file on it. Make that woman answer for what she did. The scale of Cassandra's deception was breathtaking. She'd helped tank at least 3 competing biotech firms. But this was where her destructive career ended. This time, she would face Chloe. Realizing she needed a seasoned guide, Chloe reached out to her father. Her tone was resolute when he answered, I need you, David, for one last investigation, completely off the books. David, a former lead investigator for the FDA, was hesitant, fully aware of how connected Cassandra's company was, but Chloe was adamant this was different. It was a tangible case, built on physical samples that left no digital footprints to be deleted. Then she revealed the pivotal piece of information. I found Dr. Alastair Finch. Finch was a myth, a cautionary tale whispered among junior scientists for years, the man they said had saved all the original research. It wasn't cloud data that could be remotely wiped, but physical lab notebooks and cryopreserved samples. He held years of original trial data that directly linked Cassandra to systematic data fraud across 3 major drug trials. What do you want from me? David asked, his voice a low hum. Chloe's strategy was bold. She aimed to construct ironclad cases for the FDA, the SEC, and the Department of Justice, and present them all simultaneously. Cassandra had powerful lobbyists who could make her legal troubles disappear one by one, but she couldn't deflect coordinated investigations from 3 federal agencies at once. David was quiet for a long moment before calling the idea absolutely masterful. A second later, a sharp, admiring laugh escaped him. All right, he said, send over a summary of the evidence. The following 2 weeks became a frantic race against time. Chloe survived on 4 hours of sleep a night. Her father, David, orchestrated their strategy from his study through encrypted communication. A former colleague of David's, Maria, pinpointed the most tenacious prosecutors at the DOJ and the SEC. Alastair provided the irrefutable scientific proof that connected all the fraudulent trials. Bit by bit, they assembled a multi-agency case against Cassandra Hale that was designed to be unbreakable. When the time came, they met in David's study. Her father was officially out of retirement, looking exhausted but determined. The journalist, Maria, stood by the bookshelf, anxious but ready. Alastair had even flown in from his new home in Oregon, 4 people against a corrupt pharmaceutical giant. Chloe surveyed her small team and felt a wave of certainty. We're ready, she said. Tomorrow morning, we deliver the case files to 3 different agencies. It's all based on physical evidence, so Cassandra has no way of making it vanish. The private investigator brought up Arthur Vance, the chairman of the board, and Marcus's most ardent supporter. Marcus is already talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Chloe explained. He's offering them the chairman to try and save his own skin. Her father, David, added that his contacts at the Department of Justice were looking into the regulators who had shielded Marcus for years. His entire network is collapsing. A year ago, Chloe was just a research scientist, overjoyed about her pregnancy. Now she had survived an unspeakable tragedy, but through it all, she had found a reserve of strength she never knew existed. She had built new alliances from the ashes of her life and found a focus for her grief. "Tomorrow," Chloe declared, her voice as firm as steel, "we watch his entire pharmaceutical empire crumble." They all nodded. They were ready. Chloe chose a sterile, glass-walled conference room for the final confrontation. Marcus arrived with a chilling air of confidence, like a predator certain the game was already won. "I have to say, I'm surprised you wanted to meet," Marcus said, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "I assumed you were adjusting to the new reality." Chloe ignored the patronizing tone. "Actually," she said evenly, "I'm here to offer you a different one." Marcus laughed. "An offer? You have nothing to bargain with. Your father is a retired bureaucrat with no pull, and you have no one in your corner." Chloe slid a tablet across the cold glass table. "The Phase 2 trial data for Etheria," she said softly. "The Shell Corporation, registered in the Cayman Islands." Marcus's smirk began to falter. "The payments to Northwood Clinical, the offshore holding company." The smirk disappeared completely. "I have everything, Marcus," Chloe said, her voice like ice. "I found Dr. Alistair Finch, the scientist who kept the original records." Marcus tried to recover, blustering that old lab notes were meaningless. "You're mistaken," Chloe countered. "He kept the original, unaltered sample logs and the unredacted patient reports, physical proof that can't be deleted or altered." Marcus's face turned a pale, clammy white. "You're bluffing." Chloe simply held up her phone, showing him the news alerts. The Department of Justice had just unsealed the indictment. Another alert popped up from the Securities and Exchange Commission, then one from the FDA. "As we speak," Chloe explained, "investigators from 3 federal agencies are announcing their charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. In a few hours, the Massachusetts Attorney General will file a civil suit. Your friends in Washington can't protect you from this." Marcus's hands began to shake. "And one more thing," Chloe added, leaning in. "Your chief operating officer is already cooperating. He's trading your secrets for full immunity. He learned from the best, didn't he? Always put yourself first." Marcus's meticulously crafted world finally shattered. "I will destroy you," he hissed. Chloe stood and placed the key card to their Beacon Hill apartment on the table. "You already destroyed us. Your greed cost me our daughter. You torched my entire life." She leaned close to his face. "But you forgot one very important thing. I'm a research scientist. I never, ever stop until I've uncovered every last piece of data." Chloe turned and walked out of the conference room without a single backward glance, leaving Marcus to face the ruins of his empire. 24 hours later, Marcus Thorne was arrested at a private hangar at Logan Airport while trying to board a flight out of the country. The news showed him in handcuffs, his public persona as a brilliant innovator completely demolished for the entire world to see. From the study of her father's Cambridge townhome, Chloe watched the news report, surrounded by her small team. David looked stronger than he had in years from his leather armchair, while the investigator seemed relaxed for the first time, standing by the window. On the sofa, Alistair cried silently as the man who had destroyed his career was finally held accountable. Alistair whispered, "It's finally done." Her father corrected him gently. "Not entirely. The board of directors still has to answer for their complicity." 2 weeks later, the courtroom air was heavy as Marcus Thorne awaited his sentence. Chloe sat in the front row, her expression unreadable as the judge detailed the charges. 20 years for conspiracy and fraud. As the marshals led a hollowed-out man in a prison jumpsuit away, every ounce of his famous arrogance was gone. Chloe's eyes locked with his. She offered no smile, no hint of victory, just a quiet strength he could no longer fight. He would have 2 decades to think about how his daughter died while he was falsifying data to close a merger. That was the justice she had fought for. After Marcus was sentenced, David began a new campaign. His first stop was Arthur Vance's sprawling estate in the suburbs. The former chairman looked like a ghost when he opened the door, his reputation having been obliterated by the fallout from Chloe's civil suit. He'd been forced off every corporate and philanthropic board. "David," he said, his voice a dry rasp, "we have nothing to discuss." "I think we do," David replied, stepping inside the grand entryway. "You knew about his fraudulent activities. You ignored Dr. Finch's warnings when he came to you." "A chairman's duty is to trust his CEO," Arthur shot back. "A fiduciary's duty is to protect the shareholders. You failed." David threw a manila folder onto a marble table. "This editorial is running in the Globe tomorrow. It breaks down in painstaking detail how the board was complicit in covering up Marcus's crimes." Arthur turned ashen. "You can't." "It's already been sent," David said. "I've also provided the Harvard Business Review with all the materials for a case study on corporate boards that enable executive malfeasance. Your name is mentioned several times." He looked at the man with pure disdain. "You taught Marcus that ethics were for little people. Now you get to learn that consequences are for everyone." He left Arthur standing in the middle of his ruined legacy. Arthur sold his house within the month and vanished from public life. His next visit was to Marcus. David pulled some old strings to arrange a meeting at the Federal Correctional Institution. Across a cold steel table, he faced the broken man his son-in-law had become. "If you're here to give me a sermon," Marcus began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Let's be perfectly clear," David interrupted, his voice like chipped ice. Chloe's final words, to me, were a frantic apology, saying she didn't realize the merger was so close. David leaned forward. "Her blood pressure was through the roof. She was calling out for you as the doctors were trying to save the baby, begging for her to live." "I didn't know she was in the hospital," Marcus wept. "You ignored my calls," Marcus stated, his voice dangerously calm. "That was your fatal mistake. You saw the alerts from Chloe's specialist. You knew it was an emergency, but you were at a launch party with your venture capital partner." A choked, disbelieving sound finally escaped Liam's throat. "Your tech company, your stock portfolio, your entire empire, it's all gone. You traded the life you had for a 20-year prison sentence." Marcus stood up to go. "But the one thing you'll never escape is this. For the rest of your life, you will remember her facing that health scare alone. You will hear the ringing of the phone you refused to answer, and you will know that you prized a funding round more than your own wife and child." He turned for the door as Liam's anguished cries began to fill the sterile interrogation room. "That is the price you pay," Marcus said without turning around. His next visit was to the federal facility upstate, where Ava Harrison was beginning a sentence of 30 years to life, ineligible for parole. Even in the drab prison jumpsuit, she tried to radiate an aura of control, a pathetic echo of the power she once wielded. "You can't seriously believe you've defeated me," she scoffed. "I have the truth on my side. You, on the other hand, have nothing left," Marcus countered, sliding a data pad across the steel table. "Every investor who once looked up to you, every tech journalist you had on your payroll, they all know exactly what you orchestrated. Every single one of your backup plans has been systematically taken apart." "There must be another option," she whispered, the last ounce of her arrogance finally shattering. "There isn't," Marcus said flatly. "You went after my family because you saw an art curator, someone you thought was weak. That was a catastrophic miscalculation." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a cold, precise whisper. "I spent 30 years on the bench as a judge, presiding over the most complex financial fraud cases in the country. I know exactly how to unwind criminal enterprises like yours from the inside out. He stood and walked away, leaving her to confront the bleak future she had created. Enjoy the next 3 decades. I will personally see to it that they are as devoid of hope as you tried to make my daughter's life. He left her with the suffocating reality of a life that now contained only consequences. A month later, Chloe sat in a quiet San Francisco clinic with a view of the bay, hearing the words that turned her entire world on its axis. "Congratulations," the doctor said, her expression gentle and kind. "You're about 12 weeks along." Chloe's hand flew to her stomach as a tidal wave of disbelief and pure shock washed over her. 12 weeks. That meant it was from before her entire world had been torn apart. Before the insider trading scheme came to light, yes, the doctor confirmed softly. You conceived before any of it was made public. A new life had been growing inside her through all the devastation and heartbreak. The timing was undeniable. It was from the last weekend she and Liam had spent in Napa, before she'd found the confirmation for Ava's secret prenatal screening on their shared cloud account. This child was a fragile, impossible connection to the life she thought she had lost forever. The doctor asked kindly, "Are you okay? I know this must be an overwhelming amount of information to process." Chloe let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "I am. It's just, I didn't think this was possible anymore. Given the immense stress you've been under," the doctor began, "if you feel you need to explore your options—" "No," Chloe said, her voice suddenly strong with a fierce, unwavering certainty. "I want this baby more than anything in the world." The doctor's smile was full of compassion and understanding. "In that case, we are going to provide you with the very best care." She drove directly to her father's home in Pacific Heights, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Marcus was in his study, reading, looking more at peace than she had seen him in years. He saw the expression on her face and immediately closed his book. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. After she told him her news, a profound, hopeful silence settled between them. Then, his tired face broke into a smile of such pure tenderness. It was a sight she hadn't seen in a very long time. "A new beginning," he whispered, pulling her into a solid, grounding hug. "Chloe, after the nightmare you have endured, this is an absolute miracle." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm going to name her Hope," Chloe said quietly, "because that's what this feels like." 3 months later, she stood at the launch event for the Phoenix Fund, a non-profit incubator funded entirely by the assets seized from Liam and Ava's collapsed firms. The sleek, modern office was buzzing with energy, filled with young, brilliant minds who had been overlooked by traditional venture capitalists. A large digital art installation, representing ethical innovation, was the lobby's centerpiece. Chloe rested a hand on her growing belly, her father beside her. Standing with them was Ben, the lead programmer whose whistleblowing testimony had helped expose the fraud, and Sarah, a young founder who Ava had nearly bankrupted. They were a small group, united by betrayal and a shared commitment to building something better. "I'm calling you Hope because your existence is the foundation we build on when everything else has turned to ash," she whispered to her bump. "He would be so proud of you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You never gave up. I couldn't. I owed it to the life I thought I was bringing into the world." Sarah gave her arm a supportive squeeze. "And now you get a fresh start." Chloe nodded. "Yes, but this is different. Before, my life's work was curating a collection for a world built on greed. This time," she said, looking at her small, passionate team, "I'm doing this for myself, for the future I lost, and for the daughter I'm about to welcome." Long after everyone else had gone home, Chloe sat by the large window overlooking the city, watching the fog roll in over the bay. She was alone with her thoughts, which for the first time in what felt like forever, were calm. She reflected on the past year, on everything she had been forced to release, and all that she had unexpectedly gained. They say that time heals all wounds, but she knew that wasn't quite right. Time just makes the sharp edges feel less painful. Healing is a deliberate choice you make every single day. She rose to her feet, placing a protective hand over her belly. I lost my husband, she said to the quiet night. I lost the life I had built. I lost the person I was in a world of ruthless ambition that was never truly mine. But from all that loss, I discovered the person I was always meant to become. My father taught me that true justice isn't about getting even. It's about ensuring the people who break things can never shatter another life again. She looked around the beautiful office space. Liam would be in prison for at least 2 decades. Ava was serving a life sentence. Their power to cause harm was finished, but Chloe's new life was just starting. This time, she said to the sparkling city lights, I'm building it my way. As she turned to leave, she whispered one final time, for the future that could have been, thank you. A fairy horn sounded in the distance, a single, mournful note against the backdrop of the city. Chloe smiled, held her stomach, and walked toward her future. 4 months later, on a bright San Francisco morning, Hope Eleanor Vance was born. She was flawless, with her mother's calm and observant eyes. In the hospital room, Chloe held her daughter tightly, while Marcus wiped away tears of joy, and Ben started a new cloud folder labeled Baby Hope Photos. Hello, world, Hope, Chloe whispered. The past is gone, and you are my future. As the newborn cuddled against her, Chloe felt a powerful, profound sense of peace wash over her for the very first time. 1 year later, she stood at the entrance of the Phoenix Fund. It was no longer just a startup, but a thriving hub for ethical technology and innovation. It was a place of creation, born from an unimaginable betrayal. The fund had already launched the careers of more than 30 young entrepreneurs in its first year. Something truly good had been built from the wreckage of something so bad. Chloe held Hope on her hip, pointing to the collaborative workspaces and the young innovators sketching out ideas on whiteboards. That digital art piece, Chloe said softly, it represents the bright future that belongs to people like you. She thought of Marcus, happily mentoring the founders, not of Liam or Ava in their separate prisons. She thought of Hope's future, of her creativity and her kind heart. You are safe here, my sweet girl, she whispered. You are part of something positive, something built to last. Just then, a shy young woman approached her. Are you Chloe Vance? My startup just received its seed funding from your organization, and I can't find the words to thank you enough. Chloe offered her a warm smile. Come inside, she said. Let me tell you about how I learned that building something with purpose will always be more powerful than destroying something for profit. As she guided the woman into the building, Chloe finally understood. The grief never fully goes away, but it can be transformed. Your deepest pain can become your greatest purpose, and the love you carry never truly dies. It simply finds a new way to grow. If this story resonated with you, if Chloe's path gave you hope, please press the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Post a comment below and let me know what you would have built from the ashes. And if you're not already part of our community, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss another story of resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable strength of a mother's love. Your support is what makes it possible for us to share these stories.